Right. So I'll like to introduce Matthew Jones, who's Historic England's Maritime Historic Environment Record Manager. He's here to whet our appetites about the new Maritime HER system that's being introduced. It's going to be a light touch because I know this is going to be presented in much greater detail as a webinar on the 20th of January. So look out for details about that. But without further ado, over to you, Matt, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Let's see how this goes. Right, are we all good? Marvellous. Okay, so as Stuart says, this is going to be a fairly broad brushstroke presentation, giving a bit of context for why we've developed the Marine HER using arches, where we're at in the sort of our development cycle, and what our plans for the future are. I'll start off just by, if I can actually navigate on my own presentation. There we go. Thank you. I'll start off by just giving a bit of context. So within what we might sort of more broadly refer to as the blue economy, sort of the amount that offshore development is accelerating and fast becoming an incredibly fast-paced competitive environment. We've got offshore wind expansion with the target of 65 gigawatts, I presume, by 2035 production. We've got the fishing industry, the aggregate industry, undersea cables, and marine conservation, all competing for space on the seabed. And with climate change also having an impact on marine and coastal heritage. So things that are currently coastal may well become marine in the not too distant future, and we need to consider the impacts there. It became quickly apparent that not only was Historic England's own marine data set sort of stuck within a larger data set, which some of you may be familiar with. It was itself within an Arches instance called Warden. It was the larger national monuments record, as was, and the NMHR, the National Marine Heritage Record, was embedded within that, and therefore was quite difficult to access for a specialist audience, especially sort of within that planning context. But also that in and of itself it's quite specialized and has a lot of incredibly detailed information on the work that we've been doing internally in Historic England within our marine research and planning teams. But it is not the only marine heritage data set out there. There are many other, or marine archaeological data sets out there. There are many others, the UK Hydrographic Office, various industrial protocols that are carried out through those various industries that are all taking place offshore. And across those various data sets, there are many formats, many standards. There's gaps in data monitoring and understanding what is changing. And it's also increasingly difficult to integrate all of those marine data sets into a single place, and that constrains the opportunities for making decisions in this rapidly changing environment. And this is a challenge that's obviously faced by the broader marine heritage sector, and it means that it's becoming increasingly important to collaborate and to share data. And so it's within this context that the decision was made to build the specialist marine heritage marine historic environment record. The project was known internally through development as Mariner, and you may have heard that term referred to previously. Now that we are live, internally at least, we are referring to the system as the Marine HER, and to our team who are managing it as the Marine Historic Environment Record Service for England. So we as a team came into being in September of last year. And we have been sort of laying the groundwork for establishing ourselves as the team that manages and facilitates access to marine heritage data that has been thus far created by Historic England, but also sort of bringing in other data sets and collaborating with partners internally and externally to increase the size and remit of that data set. But the first version of Arches for marine HERs, which you might sort of think of as an extension of Arches for HERs, or rather a more specialist application of sort of Arches for HERs having laid the groundwork, Arches for Marine HERs adds some extra models and functionality that's specifically geared towards off the sort of particular challenges of offshore archaeology. And just a few weeks ago, November the 6th, we reached our first major development milestone, which has seen what you might sort of think of as the minimum viable product come online for use internally. So the Marine HER service is using it, as I say, to create and edit and manage and facilitate access to records. We're also, there is editorial access for colleagues in marine research and marine listing. We are only providing other users sort of read-only access on an invite basis, but we are also starting to collate user feedback at this point to try and inform the next stage of development. So that's just on that slide. You can see also just definitions for those two sort of terms that we are using going forward. So the Marine HER is the system that's comprised that is providing comprehensive record for planning, policy, and protection, and the service, the Marine HER service, is us as a team ensuring that the data is reliable, consistent, and accessible. Just a quick screenshot. As I say, technical detail and demos will be saved for the big webinar, about which more later. And many of you will be familiar with this sort of Arches search interface. So there's not a huge amount to explain here, other than you might see that in the search box at the top left, we've got one of the models is RecSite. One of the sort of big challenges moving this data across from Warden into the Marine HER was that the decision was made in the modelling process to split what was just called Maritime vessel into two different models, one for the RecSite and one for the vessel itself, so that we could separate sort of biographical information about ships prior to their loss from the archaeological data referring to the RecSite on the seabed. Those two things can now be recorded separately, but then linked together. But it also means that we can separately record both vessels that we know to have been lost within British waters, but we don't know where their RecSite is. And then conversely, we can also record RecSites where we haven't identified what vessel it is, and we can record those two things separately rather than just having one marine vessel record that has to try and accommodate all of that information. The other thing that's changed with the advent of the Marine HER, sort of in terms of the data we hold, is that we've actually extended our remit from when we were managing data within the larger National Monuments record to moving over to our new system. We used to just cover just the 12 nautical miles offshore of England, the territorial waters, out to from mean high tides out to 12 nautical miles. Our remit has now extended to what is known as the English Offshore Marine Planning Area, which was defined in the Marine and Coastal Access Act in 2009. That goes out to up to 200 nautical miles offshore, as long as it isn't within any other nation's territory, I believe. So that significantly expands our remit into geospatially, as well as just in terms of the content. So this is a kind of broader timeline. The two dark squares you can see are the ones I already covered in the earlier slide about the establishment of the Marine HER and then reaching development milestone 1 with the internal launch. Back in 1992, that was when the internal dataset, the NMHR, was first created. So we do have a significant amount of information. This is, it's not an insignificant dataset. It's, 2.5 to 3 decades worth of research that is being moved over. But as I've said, there is room for expansion. Milestone 2, which will be partway through next year, hopefully. These were sort of the aspirations of quarter 2 and quarter 4 may have been pushed back a little bit since the deadlines were originally put forward. They're not deadlines anyway. They're probably more like Q2, Q3, and then into 2027 at this point. But milestone 2, we'll try and get full integration with ArcGIS Pro for searching and editing records. Data within the Marine HER will also be visible through Historic England's Heritage Gateway platform, whereby data from all HERs and Historic England's internal databases is made sort of widely searchable in sort of a collated, summarised form, and we'll be going through the government legislated accessibility audit as well. But as I say, from this point onwards, we are taking a more user-led, feedback-based approach and a sort of iterative development cycle, rather than having a prescriptive roadmap. So that will allow us to be a bit more flexible and prioritise things that come up from user feedback for the next milestone. And then the final milestone will be the full launch of a publicly accessible data system, and also potentially, as has already been referred to, looking ahead to using Lingo in earnest. Just in terms of what is in the marine HER, in the diagram on the left, you can see what was in the old NMHR. Casualties referring to those vessels where we don't know where the wreck site is, but we just know that they have been lost. And then conversely, wreck sites where we do know where the archaeological remains are. Obstructions are usually just sort of, we record them as monument records, and they're just sort of items on the seabed that we don't know what they are, but they've just been noted as possible of archaeological interest and usually of an obstruction to shipping. We've also got find spots, aircraft, and aircraft crash sites, which have also been split out into two models in a similar fashion. And you can see that there is a huge range. That word cloud on the right, those are the models within the marine HER. And as you can see, beyond those basic models for the heritage assets that I've already described, we've also now got huge potential for scientific and environmental data to be hosted within the marine HER as well, to provide that environmental context. So you can see we're sort of thinking forward to various kinds of scientific dating, and also climate hazards, which I believe that there is going to be a sort of special concept collections being created internally to manage and designate climate risks and hazards. These current and future data flow lines are kind of in order of what we already have versus things that are going to be coming in future. So the Richard and Bridget Larn are a series of lengthy tomes of indexes of British shipwrecks. They formed the backbone of the NMHR back in the 1990s, and that was supplemented with our internal research and casework and other shipwreck indexes. But then as we sort of get down this list, these are the sort of various internal and external flow lines of data that we're hoping to incorporate into the marine HER to try and make it that comprehensive and trustworthy data set that will make us the first port of call for marine heritage data in England. And that's sort of the direction of travel. So we're hoping that the use of arches will allow us to strengthen that long-term data governance and resilience, to collaborate both internally and externally to bring more data online, especially through the bulk data import capabilities. And also we can obviously, once we are fully publicly online, we can invite contributions from partner researchers and volunteers. We want to, as I say, improve interoperability across the heritage and marine sectors, so we can really embed Historic England in as a sort of major player in that wider marine sector, the blue economy, get that environmental and climate context embedded into our data sets, as I say, to provide that additional context, and make us, as I say, the trusted first port of call, rather than having all of these siloed marine heritage data sets floating around. Really get ourselves embedded into that planning process, much like terrestrial HERs, to become the place where you can get all of not only the marine heritage data, but all that contextual information that can inform the rapidly expanding offshore the rapidly expanding offshore activities that are taking place. So yeah, just finally, as I say, it's been quite light on technical detail, and if you want that technical detail, then there's no better place to find it than the webinar that will be taking place on January 20th, 4 till 5 p.m. That webinar will cover not only the sort of early modelling decisions and context that I've briefly touched upon for why the marine HER has been made, but also cover the entire development journey, including GIS data transfer, especially the kind of interesting fact that it's been an arches to arches data transfer, and I'm sure that'll be of interest to quite a lot of people. And sort of lessons learnt about throughout this process. So it's going to be an absolutely fascinating webinar, I'm sure. And our dev team, many of whom are in the room with us now, I'm sure will give a lot more detail on that technical side of things. So I will hope to see many of you there. Information on registration for that event will be coming shortly, and I will post it on the forum as and when we receive it. I'm hoping there might even be a snazzy QR code that you can scan to register for the event, fingers crossed. So yes, I hope to see many of you there. And that brings me to the end of my very quick fly through of where we're at and where we're going. Obviously, if you have any questions, please let me know. But other than that, thank you for listening.